I'm a professor at the UT Health School of Public Health in Austin and affiliated with the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living. This is the third in our series of 10 webinars on making physical activity a public health priority, public health planning for Active Texas 2030. We'll begin here in a couple minutes, let some people gather, but with respect to our speaker and everyone else who's on time, we won't dally too long. So just to let you know that you're in the right or wrong place. Okay, my clock officially, and since I have the privilege of the podium, it is the official clock, is 1:02. So I think we'll begin. Again, welcome to those of you who joined us today. This is the third in the series of summer discussion and webinar series we're having about public health planning for physical activity in the state of Texas. My name is Bill Cole. I'm a professor at the UT Health School of Public Health in Austin and the Michael and Susan Dell Center. And today we are extremely privileged to have Dr. Jane Greenberg join us to talk about physical activity promotion and planning for the education sector, our third in our series. We have several propositions on which we're operating. First, that public health planning is central to improving any population health, whether it's dealing with the current pandemic of SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, or diabetes prevention, or physical activity and health. Progress cannot be made unless there's a plan on which to focus and goals and so forth going forward. Those of you in the state of Texas, you may not know that the Texas is one of two states right now that has standalone physical activity plans for public health. Active Texas 2020 was born in 2008. And then under the auspices of the then Texas Governor's Council on Physical Fitness. It had actually predated the current U.S. National Physical Activity Plan. Since that time, the U.S. Physical Activity Plan has come online and has been revised once, last decade, if you will, and we're now preparing for a second revision. So there's a need to update the Texas plan, looking towards the future. I think one of the key distinguishing characteristics of the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan is its sector-based approach, dealing with various societal sectors and what strategies and tactics might be able to be utilized to promote physical activity in each of those 10 societal sectors. The purpose of the webinar, of which one is today, the webinar series, discussion series, one of which is today, is to get ideas and opinions from stakeholders. What we are doing throughout the summer is asking the chairs of each of the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan sector standing committees to join us as a local expert. And then half of the session today and others will focus on what that sector is trying to achieve and how they're trying to achieve it. And the remainder of the hour with us today on the webinar will be focused on questions, comments suggestions and other kind of things from people online. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. There is on WebEx a chat box, a chat feature. Please post any questions as they occur there. I'll try to manage that, and then by the time Dr. Greenberg finishes, we'll be able to have a discussion, I hope. These are the sectors, societal sectors in each of the 10 areas for the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan. We have already had webinars in the military sector and the healthcare sector. Today we're focusing, as I said, on education sector. The remainder of these additional sectors will be will occur in the next actually couple of weeks. So please check your email, tune in. I would love to have you join not just this one, but others as well. Actually, tomorrow, the 28th, we'll be talking about the media and media and communications sector, and then the others that are scheduled currently are listed. There's two remainder ones that need to be scheduled, and as soon as those are scheduled, we'll be able to get that announcement out. I'm delighted. My good friend Jane Greenberg has agreed to join us today. There's probably no one more qualified to talk about the education sector and what's needed for physical activity in schools than Dr. Greenberg. Previously, in her previous life, she was the district coordinator in Miami-Dade School District for physical education. She wears an enormous number of hats. Retirement from Miami-Dade has not slowed Jane down, I'm pleased to say. And she's going to join us and talk about the education sector that she chairs for the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan. So Jane, welcome. We're extremely grateful for you to to be here today, and you have the podium.
Thanks so much, Bill. I appreciate it. Let me get my screen all lined up here. Okay, everything's visible?
Looks great.
Okay.
There is someone there. There is a bit of an echo. If you're not speaking, if you could mute your microphone, that'd be great.
So thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today to talk about the education sector of the National Physical Activity Plan, and to also acknowledge the committee members whose names can be found on the Physical Activity Alliance website for their hard work in putting this together. What I'm going to share today is what we are doing with education, and the purpose of, or the importance of the education is, since school is a central focus of daily life for most children and adolescents, and of course young adults, we are looking at how we can promote and expand physical activity opportunities through a strategic planning, tactics, and objectives. So we have 7 main projects here, and one is adopting strong policies that support implementation of the comprehensive school physical activity program model, which I'll share in a minute, providing high quality standards-based physical education programs, encouraging after school, holiday, vacation, and of course, any out of school time to adopt policies, practices that ensure participants are physically active, adopting physical activity standards for our youngest kids in early childcare and early childhood education programs, promoting opportunities and incentives for college and university students to adopt and maintain physical active lifestyles, providing pre-service physical training and in-service professional development, which is so critical to make sure that the persons that are delivering these programs are qualified and up to date on what can be done. And of course, developing and advocating for policies that promote physical activity among all students. So we are looking at the span from 0 to 21. Now, the main focus of what we were looking at was actually the Comprehensive School Physical Activity Plan, which we call CSPAC. And that's actually a multi-component approach by which schools and districts use all opportunities for students to be physically active, meet the nationally recommended 60 minutes of physical activity or more each day, and develop the knowledge, skills, and confidence to become physically active for a lifetime, as well as physically literate. So this is the model that we've used as we were developing our plan. So we have 7 strategies that I'll break down following these 2 slides. The first strategy that we looked at is that states and school districts should adopt policies that support implementation of the comprehensive school physical activity program model. Second strategy is schools should provide high quality physical education programs. The third, provide after school holiday and vacation programs so that they can be physically active when they're not in the school environment. Fourth strategy, states should adopt standards, again, for our earliest learners from 0 to 5 years old. Strategy 5 is colleges and universities should provide students and employees, and you will see this throughout, that we will be talking about school staff as well as employees at the university level. So we are talking about the preschool, the K-12 environment, and the university environment. Strategy 6 is educational institutions should provide pre-service professional development and in-service so that either student teachers, activity leaders should be able to implement physical activity programs for all students. And when we say all students, a new emphasis that we're really putting forward in this midterm update is students with disabilities. And number 7, professional and scientific organizations should develop and advocate for policies that promote physical activity among all students. So again, we're looking at the school age population in education, but we also know that the adult population does need a daily physical activity as well. So for strategy 1, there's a lot of words on the page, but I highlighted what's important. And this talks about the promotion and the implementation of the comprehensive school physical activity program. So the first thing is to become familiar with the model. And the model with physical education as the hub does include physical activity during school, which is the physical activity classroom breaks and recess, family and community engagement. Parents serve such an important role, caretakers, everybody that has a hand on developing the student should be involved in physical activity to serve as role models. Staff involvement, where we do want a healthy school environment so that students and staff, administrators, custodial, cafeteria workers, paraprofessionals, everybody maintains a healthy lifestyle. And before and after school programs. And this involves, as we'll talk a little bit later, about intramurals, sport, clubs, anything that will get every student an opportunity. And again, full inclusive programming. So what we're looking at each state can do to start this implementation is they can ask school districts and streaming down to have schools have a written plan for implementing the CSPAT program. And that can easily be done through the school district or school site wellness committees where they meet and the physical education person should have a seat at that table. Professional development so that we don't rely on people to think they know what we're doing, but we actually provide opportunities for them to learn. The CDC has great opportunities. Shape America has great opportunities on their site. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. There's all kinds of places to find opportunities for comprehensive school physical activity program training. And then once you have a training cadre, they can go ahead and support, depending on the size of the school district, and do either district level training or individual training. And the one thing that we strongly advocate for is at least one physical education teacher with professional development on physical education at every school site. And this is going to get just a little smaller, but it's really talking about the same thing. So I'm going to go through those quickly. Active transportation, biking to school, walking to school, skateboarding to school. Involve active transportation because when we talk about the 60 minutes of physical activity, they may not all be able to get in the school environment, but they can be throughout the school day. Before school, active transport, after school, active transport, and all those minutes count. Daily recess, there should be 20 minutes of daily recess, which would include absolutely supervised activity, but also free play that's supervised. Physical activity breaks in the classrooms or outdoor during the school day. We know about the physical activity breaks in the classroom. but our sector plan is also promoting the outdoors. We need to get our kids outdoors. They need fresh air. They need to use the environment. So getting the kids outdoors is part of the new plan. Recreation, physical activity before or after school day. This can be activities as the kids are waiting to line up to go into classrooms before the school. They can be organized in just any kind of activity. Equipment can be put out as the kids are waiting to enter the building. Interscholastic sports. We want to make sure it's equitable. One of the biggest hindrance is the pay to play. But what we want is scholastic sports to be available for every person, every child, and then as well intramural, which would be free, that can have as many intramural teams on a school. Professional development, we've also mentioned, and adopting reciprocal agreements. And I say reciprocal is because we know that there's a lot of organizations that want to use the school facilities when the school is not using them. But there's also many opportunities for schools to use the outdoor activities such as parks and recreation facilities. So it should be a reciprocal agreement and not just a one way. So we do stress the reciprocal shared use agreements. On strategy 2, which is closest to my heart, is high quality physical education programs. We believe that physical education is an educational program which separates it from physical activity. It should comply with Every Student Succeeds Act. The recommendation with instructional periods should be at least 150 minutes per week in elementary school and 225 minutes per week in the middle and senior high schools. We want to make sure that the students are physically active for at least 50% of the class time. And we need to make sure that that we adopt district level policies that preclude the withholding of physical activity or using it as punishment. And we'll have laws prohibiting the use of physical activity as punishment or inappropriate. For example, not to have the kids run lap or do push-ups if they're misbehaving. Physical activity should never be used as punishment, nor should the kids be kept inside the classroom because they didn't finish their class assignment and held back from physical activity. And again, in this respect, we're also looking to eliminate waivers and substitutions for physical education. Although there's great merit to, of course, we support the JROTC programs in support of working with our military sector, but marching band and athletics is very different from physical education. Because it is an education program, there should be standards based and there should be grade level outcomes. And we know that the program should be evaluated. So using, for example, the CDC PCAT is a very easy way to evaluate your physical education program. And we want to make sure that we do have strong instructional practices, that this is not free time, free play. This is an instructional program, and that students are assessed as within every other subject area. And we do support the use of validated fitness assessment, not for the purpose of grading students, not for the purpose of evaluating teachers, but to get a good handle on where our students are in fitness. So we want to make sure our physical education programs include enough opportunity to increase their fitness levels. And again, I'll move through. We do support strongly students with disabilities and the need to implement greater programs, especially in the community connections. So students with disabilities will be able to recreate outside of the school environment. Again, professional development and strong use with students with disabilities in opportunities. On strategy 3, we look at that holiday after school and out of school time. For example, when students are out of school during winter recess, there's 2 weeks of opportunity for them to maintain a level of physical activity, especially during the summer. We know that there's a slope where students decline in their fitness levels, either from sitting around, not doing much, eating more than they would during the school year when they're preoccupied in their classes. So we want to make sure that there are standards for after school, holiday, and out of time, with the activity for 60 minutes for the full day programs and 30 minutes of activity for half day participation. We require that children and youths participating, including those with disabilities, again, you're going to see this throughout our new strategies, and adopt all kinds of age appropriate and developmentally appropriate programs. We cannot expect a 6-year-old to do the same activities as a 16-year-old. they must be developmentally and age appropriately implemented. The minimization of free screen time. And of course, again, we want to make sure that there are standards and that every time that the children are out of school, there's opportunities for them to maintain some level of physical activity. In the fourth strategy, we have experts in the early childcare and early childhood programs. And again, this is so important that we work with various coalitions and different agencies to make sure that our youngest children, uh, and this involves even crawling around at the youngest in daycare centers, 60 minutes in full day programs, 30 minutes in half day programs, and that we have national organizations, state experts, agencies develop model physical activity quality standards for early care and education settings. So our latest emphasis is putting more care on the child care programs as well. We also want to make sure that we have the best practices and that there are standards and that we have models. And again, the outdoor setting. We need to get the kids out from inside the building all day long, bring them into the natural setting, of course, weather permitting, whether it's too cold or too hot, we need to monitor those conditions. But getting the kids outdoors is a major priority now because there's so much physical activity, as we learned from the shutdown of COVID, that being indoors was something that was difficult, but people got outside and developed new activities such as walking in the parks, biking, jogging. It's very easy, but to enjoy the outdoor space. On strategy 5, we brought the emphasis to the students and faculty that are at the colleges and universities. And we really want them to enhance and develop opportunities and long-term incentive programs aimed at adopting and maintaining physical active lifestyles. So for example, we can have universities, and this would go through, of course, their requirements, implement minimum credit for graduation. Maybe it's a half credit, but just to get the undergraduate students who may not have been exposed to physical activity programs prior to attending college, to get them learning about different physical activities, and that they can offer both academic credit and non-credit bases, as well as having dedicated physical activity facilities and programs that provide access and promote physical activity for all students. We want to make sure that the employees, as well as the students on campus, have access to quality physical activity programs. And we also want to make sure that there's accessible and active transportation. Are there bike trails? Is there biking lanes that students, employees, and visitors can use if they're on campus? Is there safe walking? And this would take developing and providing administrators and colleges, universities with materials documenting the benefits of physical activity and how it should be integrated into long-term campus strategic plans. So the infrastructure of the actual university setting can add to the physical activity through the outdoor space and active transportation, just as we talked about the K-12 setting with the biking and walking programs. And again, with strategy 6, we talk about pre-service professional training for physical education teachers. And you'll see a new language there. It's APETE, and we're emphasizing the adapted physical education teacher education, as well as in-service professional development for motor skills, and fitness to prepare educators. We want to make sure that when our physical education teachers or activity leaders or sport coaches come out of a university program, that they're trained and qualified to work with all students. So we want, as part of our tactics, to support the adapted physical education teacher education programs at colleges and universities to ensure the supply for certified adapted physical education teachers in the K-12 schools meet the demand. Right now, we know that there's a shortage, so we're hoping that this strategy really comes to light. We want the physical education teachers to assume campus level leadership in promoting physical activity, just as we want them to be the physical activity leaders at the school site setting. And of course, prepare professionals to deliver equitable and inclusive physical activity programs across students of all ages that can participate in moderate to vigorous physical activity. And the last part of strategy 6 is that to prepare educators that can deliver programs that provide children and youth with safe, enjoyable, health promoting sport and recreational experiences. We work closely, of course, with our many sectors, as Bill said, with the 10 sectors in total, and with the sports sector. We look to how do we train to get better coaches within the school setting so that the sport experience is enjoyable for all students, as well as the importance of promoting sport and engagement in sport. And strategy 7 is looking at, we look at our professional and scientific organizations. Again, Shape America, great professional organization, ACSM, I apologize. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, to help us develop strong policies that promote physical activity among all students, faculty, and staff. And to do this, we advocate for the enactment of federal and state policies that establish physical education as a component of the well-rounded education, and it stays that way. In each state, establish a process for holding school districts accountable for delivering physical education programs that comply with meeting state content standards. And usually the state standards are in alignment with the national standards, but the state standards should be met. And we want to make sure that our physical education programs are not a throughout the ball programs, but actually a standard-based program. And again, parents are critically important in working with our decision makers, our principals, our superintendents, everybody that has a leadership role in the school environment can help us with these state level policies, but we so much respect the parents. And again, to support and provide for daily recess, beyond the lunch recess, because there's not enough time for the kids to eat lunch anyway, and to provide physical education to all students. We supporting adoption of strong policies requiring students at all levels to be provided with multiple physical activity classroom breaks during every school day. I know as an adult, it's difficult for me to sit for 5 consecutive hours. Don't know how a 6-year-old can, or a teenager, 13 years old, even though they get a chance to change in between classes. But every subject area can just do a very short minimum stretch break to get the kids physically active and rejuvenated for their next assignment. And again, educate school and district administrators and key stakeholders about the beneficial effects of physical activity on learning and lifelong health. And at that, I know I went through what direction we're going through that we're hoping to achieve by 2025. But at this time, I'll turn it back to Bill and see what do we have as a Q&A session.
Jane, terrific. Thank you very much for this broad overview. Could you release your share screen? And I'll see if I can't get back to. There we go. So there's a couple questions that have already popped up in the chat box. Please feel free to do so. Here we've got ample time for some discussion. I'd also like to find out from people who have some experience in this area locally in Texas. What are some barriers to some of these goals in Texas schools? Jane, as you know, we're trying to articulate the National Physical Activity Plan, which I put a link in the chat box for everyone if they aren't aware of it, various sectors and so forth. Articulated down to the state and adapt a state plan or develop a state plan that's sector-based approach. Operating on the assumption that all health is local, how can these national strategies and tactics, which are extremely comprehensive, how can they be articulated for state and local participation? Is there a low-hanging fruit, for example? Where does someone start who's an activist, who maybe works in schools, maybe runs a nonprofit, interested in the state? There's other questions you can see here, but we can start the discussion there. And then interested in people who in the audience in attendance today, examples of barriers or enablers that might help or hinder achieving some of these tactics. So Jane, reactions to these?
Sure. We'll start with the low-hanging fruit because I truly believe that change can be made local and the power of the local school and the local school district. And again, through the wellness committee. Now, we showed you 7 sectors, and each one of them is fairly comprehensive. So, because this was only a sampling of what the education sector plan looks like, it's more extensive with many more tactics and objectives. But the low-hanging fruit is, where do you want to start? You're not going to achieve everything in the first year. If it's putting classroom activity breaks into the classroom, that's a low hanging fruit. Looking at the school day and the hours in the school day, where does recess fit in? And we've seen that there are several states that have recess policies requiring this. Physical education may be harder to implement daily based on the fact of adding more teachers, even though that's the objective. So my low hanging fruit would be work with your community leaders, with parks and recreation departments. The job would be to coordinate the community with the school district. And there's so many resources and support, both human and fiscal, that can be attained, as well as facility, uh, to achieve these low hanging fruits. So I would start with becoming an active member of your wellness committee at the school. If it's not one, try and make one. Have open communication with your school site administrators and work with your faculty to see what can be done, because when there's buy-in, then then progress happens.
So start local. All health is local. I think is a resounding theme and a recurring theme as we gather input here. Melody Alcazar, City of Austin, has several questions. Melody, are you able to open your microphone and ask them so I don't have to uh, repeat and
Yes,
let you?
sorry for the,
No, go
can you
ahead,
hear
please.
me okay?
Please. Yeah. Melody.
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, I'm with the Parks Department, and we work very closely with our school districts and have started to dip our toes into how greening schoolyards impacts physical health for kiddos basically ages 0 to 18. So most of my questions are around, if you're looking at incorporating OLE, which uses the Preventing Obesity by Design model for early childhood, and then really helping policy show up in practice, which is often where a disconnect happens. So you'll have a policy in place, but in practice, it's not all that feasible to do. So that's where a lot of my questions stem from.
Yeah, and that's why we focused a lot, and you'll see that I highlighted those often, is in the professional development and the training. That too often, where policies exist is great. Where the rubber meets the road is where the implementation of the policy takes place. So if the personnel that's delivering the services to the 0 to 18 or the younger childcare centers, if they're not trained and comfortable on these programs, then that opens up the door to say, hey, let's do some professional development and let's bring this to the place where the kids are. But that's a great point.
Another point I think that Melody had there was do you help? Is there a way to help districts specifically with joint use agreements in parks? I mean, this varies with municipality, with county, other kind of layers of government, but it's fundamental. Communication. This is a cross-sectoral uh, thing within the national U.S. national plan that we really haven't addressed yet, and that's at the parks and recreation sector. Is there a way to help districts understand the benefit of joint use agreements? Any comments on that, Jane or others who are here?
Yeah, I'll start it and then throw it out to the audience. The joint use agreements, and the reason we say reciprocal is many school districts do have through their legal system a joint use agreement that may require outside agencies to pay a minor fee to use the facility, and that's more for the upkeep, as well as realizing that if they use the building, let's say, when basketball is not in play, they want to use the gymnasium, the school building has to be open, and by law, there has to be, in some states, a school district personnel at the school to open the building and close the building, as well as be able to call security if help is needed. So there's that cost. So understanding how to navigate that and where districts can work with their community-based organizations on shared use agreements. Once they understand that and see what's going on, if you have a large school district and you have teams, let's say, and I'll use the indoor facilities such as basketball, if you have boys and girls basketball, varsity and JV, you're going to be using the gymnasium most days of the week as well as in the evenings for games. That makes it harder for outside agencies to use the school site facilities. So sometimes it's simply just a scheduling issue that prohibits that, but there usually is a cost factor for the maintenance of the facility as well as personnel that must be on site. And that's my response. So I'll go ahead and let you open that up to others that can assist.
Melody just posted another observation. Melody, go ahead, please.
Sure. Yeah. So we do have a joint use agreement between the Parks and Rec Department and the school district here, Austin ISD, and it currently has 21 school parks on that on that list. And so those sites are both co-owned and co-managed by both of those entities, so that they are managed entirely by the school during school hours, and then the Parks Department during those non-school hours. We as parks are very interested in adding more sites to that list because it helps meet our 10-minute walk efforts and making sure that all people in Austin have a quality park within walking distance of their home. The school district has pushed back on this idea, and I think it's primarily because a lot of the bond challenges that they're facing right now with needing to kind of tear down old schools and rebuild them. And when that happens on these sites, they have to condemn the land. So I say all of this just because it's something that we're actively working on right now, and would love to know if that's something that you see in other areas.
I personally haven't been involved in that at all with the bond issues and tearing down schools. So unfortunately, no, I can't comment on that.
If anyone else has any experience in that area, please just let us know in the chat box. We'll move on. Go to Houston and Derek Craig. Derek, about synergy and coordination. Are you able to speak?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about the CSPAP in terms of like implementation and interest in physical activity in school setting, obviously. And so as a student and working on dissertation stuff, I see the CSPAP as obviously a great resource, but thinking that there's also additional guidance that's needed in terms of implementation. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts or recommendations about how exactly we use this to help implementation, because obviously we know it expands beyond just PE teachers. We have to get everyone throughout the entire school involved in this. So yeah, just didn't know if you had thoughts, recommendations, anything on your past experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. The CDC has on their website a guide for implementing comprehensive school physical activity programs. So I'd recommend that you look at the guide. And again, the best way to do this is on your district or school wellness committees. They're not made up just of school personnel. They're made up of community members, parks and recreation, hospitals, the healthcare industry, faith-based organizations. This is who you need to partner with, actually all the sectors that are involved with the National Physical Activity Plan. So the best way to do that, to really get the groundswell going, is put together your committee, your wellness committee, and those are the folks that can help pull this together. But the manual is actually on the CDC website.
Jane, you're uniquely experienced in this area, obviously in your many years of leadership at Miami-Dade. But how do you develop that internal leadership to cross those, create that coordination and synergy? Committee is one thing, certainly. But it's certainly if a principal or an assistant principal digs his or her heels in, it's harder to do. How do you create that culture? You were so successful in doing that at Miami-Dade. I'm sure some people who are either in schools or want to join or on um, uh, school wellness committee, district wellness committees can learn from you. What are some thoughts from your experience on that?
Yeah, first of all, I have to attribute it to the most incredible physical education teachers that are in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, because it begins with passion. And when you have a passion and you believe in what you're doing, then you're able to pull together the leadership, because leadership involves sometimes becoming the follower and listening to people. But also in a position of leadership, you have a responsibility to reach out to the people in your community. For example, if you live in a community like Houston, where you have professional sport teams, work with their community relations department. And those are throughout the NBA, the NFL, National Hockey League, all these programs. Again, the Parks and Rec are incredible people. Your job as a leader is to connect with the community. But in order to be a leader, your followers have to trust that you're doing what's best for them and for the kids. So to step in and do that, and then the administrators need to nurture leaders in any subject area. When leaders emerge, we need to nurture them and help them develop and teach them the skills. And that's what I would say to that question.
Terrific. Let's go back to Austin. I see Cami Hawkins here, my friend. Cami, are you to have a microphone,
Yes.
or should I go ahead and you've got a particularly broad question here that's going to take some effort to, I think, try to address, but go for it.
Yes, thanks, Bill. So I'm Cami Hawkins, CEO of Marathon Kids. We work with schools across the country to implement physical activity in schools, whether it's through PE or through the classroom, brain breaks, or before and after school programs. And my question is around kind of probably an age-old problem that actually we've touched on a little bit, and that is the policies are wonderful, the plan is fantastic, the detail is amazing, but when the rubber hits the road, what is the enforceability and accountability that we can use or communicate to schools and communities that will really achieve the results that we're looking for? We work very closely with Austin Independent School District. They are probably one of the most progressive as far as physical activity plans in schools. They have a working out for wellness time, which is a 20-minute period every day that kids go out and participate in Marathon Kids, or at least they're supposed to. And what we have found now that we can track and see the mileage that these kids are actually doing, there's a huge disparity from one school to the next, from one class to the next, on what a child is actually getting.
First of all, I got to say kudos to Marathon Kids. Incredibly awesome program. So if those on the call are not implementing it, please look into it and get that in your schools and your school districts. The enforceability is a hard question. You can't make people do something. We have, of course, different things called union contracts that sometimes keep teachers from having to do something other than the delivery of instruction. And sometimes after school, it's difficult because of bus transportation, getting kids to and from school. Uh, but when you talk about Austin and you talk about the incredible work Michelle has done through the years, when you talk about Houston and what Felicia has done following Rose, there are so many opportunities and so many great people across the state of Texas that it's just a matter of reaching out to them. And it gets to be contagious, that if one school gets to do it and they're recognized at, let's say, a school-wide professional development day, then the others say, hey, how can I do that? So once it becomes more popular, then it becomes contagious as to the how can I get involved now? So the best recommendation is continue working with those that are doing the work and and kind of advertise and communicate their success stories so that it does become more popular and other people want to get involved. Enforcing anything and the accountability is extremely difficult when it's not something that's educationally required by state statute.
Yeah, except that in our state, structured physical activity minutes are state statute. So yeah. I
Yeah,
hear,
it's a cognitive dissonance in Texas. It's required, but there's no enforceability, no accountability.
right.
The legislature some years ago stopped short of doing that. So,
Yeah.
Jane, you're talking about incentives to help people bring things together, but are there uh, at the local level, are there things district leaders might be able to do that goes beyond legislative accountability to create an incentive program, for example, to get some of these policies in place? Cammie, is that what you're trying
Yeah,
to get
I mean,
at?
I totally agree with Jane, and we see it all the time. You know, when you have a champion at a school that is whether it's a PE teacher, classroom teacher, principal, it doesn't matter, even parents sometimes, that are champions for physical activity, then you see the culture of that school change, and you see that school, excel, in every single one of those kids. Has that opportunity to participate in physical activity. And so I totally agree with that. I do think, the enforceability or accountability at the district level, and Bill, you and I have talked about this before, even in Austin, we have a mayor's council on health and fitness, and we award schools kind of a fitness award. But again, it's kind of a check the box system. So yes, do we have this in place? Do we have this in place? Do we have this in place? Yes, yes, yes. But it's not really a good barometer of what's actually happening. So I do think something in the accountability world, some incentivized, some sort of incentive might be useful. Yeah, if I had all the answers, Bill, we'd be in every school in the country.
Yeah, thanks, Cammie. I totally agree with you. And like I say, the incentives can be different. You can get a movie theater to give tickets. You can get sports teams, university teams to give tickets to their games. It's not the kind of incentives that you're putting money in people's pockets to do. But again, people have to want to do it in order to do it. And we know, I've spent several years as a high school administrator, and we know how many things are on a principal's plate, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school. And we also need to respect that in the scheme of things on all educational accountability. Um, there's that pecking order. So we depend on our physical education teachers to take the leadership role at their schools. And or like you said, sometimes it's a classroom teacher for before and after school programs, or parents such as the success of Box. Um, huge impact when everybody gets involved. So even though we'd like it to be our physical education teachers, where there's situations where they may not want to be engaged, seek out those other leaders in the school site that will want to be engaged.
Jane, one of the things that's in your wheelhouse is curriculum development and the minutes of recommended PE as well as physical activity. Uh, some people in education look at those and say, "How am I possibly going to put this into a weekly schedule, class schedule, whether it's elementary or high school or so forth?" And as we know, uh, there's been a false equivalency where PE has had to displace other electives, and this idea that PE isn't as important as, quote, subject matter, such as mathematics and languages and so forth. What are your thoughts? What are your recommendations about how to fit these recommendations in and get it all done?
First of all, there's so much evidence out there, scientific evidence, that there's the relationship between physical activity and academic performance and achievement. So as soon as we get that conversation out to the decision makers, that absolutely helps with the cause. In the report by the Institute of Medicine and the National Academies of Science, Educating the Student Body, Taking Physical Activity and Physical Education to Schools, there is a couple of examples, especially for elementary school, of how to get daily physical education in, along with art and music. When you start getting to the middle school and the high school, there's also the elective programs. And in the middle school, physical education, where it may or may not be required, can also be used as an elective and sometimes as a convenience when class size requirements have to be met. So, for example, if a state says that a middle school class can only have 25 students in it, and you're in an overpopulated school, the way to get the schools out of the classroom, because in most cases, physical education, art, or music do not count for class size requirements, then that would be one way to require physical education as a way, unfortunately, to get the kids out of the building, but it works. In the high school level, as the kids progress, if they take their electives early on, and many of the students now take their high school graduation credits, such as Algebra 1, in middle school, then that even frees up more electives. So we are pushing for more states, to implement policy that requires physical education, days and times per day. But also there's a way to fit it into the schedule. A school cannot do less than what the state requires, but a school can exceed. So, for example, in the state of Florida, there's 1 credit required for high school graduation in physical education, but a school can require 2 full credits if they want. They just can't do what's less than the state. So one way to work around getting it into the day, and there are many ways to do this so that it does not compromise art or music, because the same thing with students that are in the other elective areas, such as music, um, they can take additional music classes with those extra electives. So it's how the student is using the electives when they get into the high school level, and what high school courses they take in middle school that frees up more electives. But the elementary is the easiest way to get daily physical education in, without impacting art or music. And I believe in the well-rounded child. I believe art, music, and physical education are important for every child.
Oh, great. I think that's a misnomer that people say, well, we've got to displace one thing for another, at least especially in elementary school. It just, you opened my eyes to that many years ago. It's just not necessarily the case. One final question, and again, if there's anyone who has questions, please raise your hand or post them in the chat box so I can call on you. If something occurs after the fact, or the things you'd like to share as we start to bring together these recommendations for Active Texas 2030. There is an email address on the screen. Please drop that. That goes right to me, and be able to respond. But Jane, one final kind of thought here is, what about someone in the non-educational sector, not in the educational sector? Maybe they have kids, but maybe they work in business and industry and want to become an activist, but the school wellness committee, district wellness committee, isn't their cup of tea or so forth. But they want to be an activist, a community leader. How can they get involved in something like this to help bring about change and articulate these strategies and tactics to the local level? Any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, we depend on our business leaders, and we depend on them for their community support, as well as, in some cases, for funding programs. But the business leader can, one, engage their employees And many of the employees in the local communities have kids that go to the school, so they have a vested interest. The business community member can approach a school and say, hey, we have this to offer. And it's a partnership. It's all about partnerships, that the success of any program, of any physical education program or a physical activity program, is coordinating the partnerships. And they're in every community. So a business leader would just need to get to the right person in the school district and meet and come up with a plan that's amicable to both the business leader and the school district, and then assist in supporting the program. And it may be that they fund something at the school that the school can't afford. If there, for example, is a pay-to-play situation at a high school, and that's eliminating a certain facet of the community, the business leaders may come in and say, I'm going to pick up the tab for the kids that could make the team but can't afford to pay for uniforms or transportation. And other programs that do not, such as if they have a wellness center at their facility, they can open it up free of charge for teachers to attend. And that way, when teachers become more physically fit and physically active, they have a greater tendency, because they're feeling better about themselves, to take what they're doing and bringing it to the classrooms. So it's an outside in approach as opposed to a bottom up or a top down approach.
Those are great suggestions. I think things we don't oftentimes consider is the, I don't want to say pressure, but that's exactly what it is, the outside pressure and incentives to be able to channel energy into helping schools meet some of these strategies and tactics. Any other comments or questions? We're coming up on our hour, and Jane and everyone, I want to be respectful of people's time. I very much appreciate your expertise. You're sharing your expertise, and I hope that we can engage you again as we bring together the state plan and create these priorities for the school education sector. We didn't get a chance to talk much about colleges and universities, but those remain, I think, an area that I consider almost the wild, wild west of physical activity promotion, with things we need to turn our attention to as well. Any final comments or questions from participants here? I do appreciate everyone's time and joining us today. I do believe that the weather will change in Texas sometime in the next, certainly before Halloween in October. We have this heat wave that is encompassing our entire state. So a greeting there from Jackie House. Jane, for you, if you can see it.
I can't see where the chat is, but Jackie is the chair of the Wellness Committee for Miami-Dade County Public Schools, an adapted physical education teacher, and most and foremost, one of the most incredible people you want to meet. So, hi, Jackie, and thanks for joining.
It's a mutual admiration society. She said, great talk. Anyway, thank you all very much for joining us today. And please look for announcements for the remainder. Hello?
Hello. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, there you are. Okay, great.
Okay.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.